Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ask Adam Live. ASK is the acronym for Always Seek Knowledge. This episode and others that have been published, the result, I guess, I want you to have is that you're asking questions, that you're seeking answers to those questions, whether it's about yourself, life in general, or maybe just understanding another person. One thing I've found in life is the more I've understood things, the more I've developed some level of compassion, uh, empathy, just by possibly understanding that someone else has a point of view and maybe even asking where they've come up with that. Not in a form of judgment, not in a way to conjure up some combative discussion to understand how can I try to defeat or change their mind. No, I want to understand where they're coming from to educate myself because I've not lived your life. And the more I can understand your life, the more I can understand your point of view, as well as understanding my own point of view. Why do I come up with the decisions that I make each day and the opinions that I can form? Where do they come from? And is it something constructive for me? Or is it possibly something that, well, isn't good to think about? That's actually a perfect segue into today's title, Mindset Upgrades from Fear to Fuel. Hey, let's get started, shall we? Fear isn't the enemy, it's untapped energy. Fear shows up right before growth. The question is that you should be asking yourself, do you run from it or do you use it? Fear of failure, fear of success. How about fear of rejection? I know one we all seem to have, sometimes present company, is the fear of judgment. I can't tell you how many times in and out of my life that I've always, what will people think? What if I do this? What will they say? If being outside of myself and doing something extraordinary, will they still like me or will they judge me? Constantly thinking about that. I can remember taking myself back, kindergarten. I remember the judgment developed when the teacher called me a show off and pretty much reprimanded me for acting, for trying to get others' attention. That still stuck with me for a long time until I understood that, well, in my own mind, I don't care what other people think. Now, I know that sounds harsh, but bear with me. If you eliminate that from your mindset and you start to understand that that's your mind telling you something based on something that previously happened, then you can start to pivot yourself to say, look, I don't really care what people think. And as you start to develop those neurons of not caring and not letting it affect you, well, that connection's going to kind of fade out, almost like a root that doesn't get nutrition or nourishment. Yeah, it's going to eventually kind of die out and dry up. And that's kind of what you want to do with this neuro pathway, is that you don't want to operate under that judgment. You want to say, hey, it doesn't matter what people think. I'm happy. I need to be happy. I need to be successful. You need to be that, not for someone else, not based on their judgment. Anyway, I digress. See, most people don't try to eliminate this fear. They just recode it, as I was saying. And you can tie this into career pivots, starting over, maybe even building a business. As you start to evolve and building that business, you're going to start to have those thoughts of, should I be doing this? And fear of, what if it doesn't work? Well, if you wake up every day fearing that something isn't going to work, I'm pretty certain it's not going to work, because that's your top of mind. Instead of not being, like I mentioned earlier, taking away the awareness, the constant awareness of what people think, and say, I want a successful business because I want to be happy. Well, now you're evolving. And no matter what that business looks like, and no matter how it's evolving, as long as it's making you happy and successful. Oh, by the way, and it's not harming people, but I know we don't have to mention that because we're all great, loving people in this audience. Nonetheless, once you kind of remove that fear, then you begin to learn to move with it and retool it, if you will, recode it. And now you're operating at a kind of a different level, not under that umbrella of fear. So today, I promise I'll give you 5 mindset upgrade frameworks to turn your fear into fuel and create forward motion. Let's get started. What fear actually is? Fear is a prediction, kind of a proactive mechanism, as I mentioned. And it's also a signal of a perceptive risk, right? So, whatever, let's go back to that original story I shared, just because it's, well, and it was elementary class, but it's kind of elementary and it's basic and it's universal. So, whatever occurred in this particular teacher or leader's life, that they saw something in me that they didn't like or appreciate. And so they said something to me that stuck with me. Now, was that just a moment in their life? Sure. But that stuck with me for a while. And I remember it every time I pushed it aside, man, it would come back. Like, what if, what if, what if, what if, what would people say? What if you did this? What would people think? What if you wore certain clothes? What if you dressed a certain way? Maybe you dressed down, maybe you dressed up. And that fear of judgment that you were showing off. Quite frankly, I was feeling comfortable. I can tell you, in my sales days, wearing a suit and a coat, sport coat, or a full dress, I was comfortable. It was almost like jeans and a t-shirt, which I've kind of evolved to a little bit more these days, and golf shirts as well. But it's just like, I kind of shed that skin and said, if I want to show up in a t-shirt, so be it. That's where I'm comfortable. And I'm okay with me being comfortable. And I'm also okay with you being uncomfortable. And if you don't like it, you have my sympathy. And I'm certainly empathetic, but I also want to understand why, how I dress, whether up or down, kind of affects you. And you can really apply this to business as well, as certain decisions that are made for the benefit of the business, and sometimes harsh, sometimes they're amazing, sometimes they build teams, other times they can take them down. But either way, making that decision for you and what you know is best, well, part of this presentation is that you feel good about that and that you continuously resonate with that good feeling. Because whether it's making a business decision or wearing a t-shirt or a button-down dress shirt, it's the same thing. You really have to feel good about those decisions that you're making. You really don't have time or energy to spend second guessing. And again, I speak from experience. I spent a lot of time second guessing. See, these patterns often show up and they create hesitation, self doubt, and fear of rejection. And these are the same forces that, well, they're going to quietly block your progress. And as I learned, and I've implemented it with my neuroencoding techniques and teaching, is this fear, it's just energy without direction. You start giving your life direction, you start giving your business a compass heading, that's kind of a game changer because that's the one thing you're going to be focused on. I'm almost certain, here's probably another really weird example, but it just struck me, was Columbus. Do you think Columbus sailing the high seas maybe thought, hey, if I don't make this, what will people think of me? Maybe for a brief second. But I'm pretty certain he was focused on the compass heading and going in a particular direction to get to a final destination. And the idea of what people thought, well, that was just the passing crest of a wave going by his ship. It was there and then it was gone. And that's kind of the way we need to look at how we think or even to worry what people may or may not think. Part two, here's the 5 mindset upgrade. First, identify this fear specifically. Is it vague fear? Like maybe the fear of something overwhelming? Instead of saying I'm scared, ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid of? You might possibly even ask, how do I feel? How do I feel about this? Or how do I want to feel about this? Because you may find that you're possibly not afraid of the thing, but how it makes you feel. And if you change the way you feel, or at least start to develop that muscle of feeling something different, well, then you may not be afraid of that root of being scared. For instance, some people, here's a pretty general one, is many people are afraid to fail publicly. And if you have clarity, well, that kind of reduces the intensity of this fear in public. If you know that you're going to succeed, if you know that you're doing something and there's a few speed bumps, say in your business that you're building and creating, or these adjustments in your life that you're making, well, if you have clarity about where you're going and what you want to do with yourself in your life, whether it's a career or just being personally fit, and that's mentally as well, by the way, not necessarily physical with muscles, but feeling good about yourself, having a good, healthy gut, having a good, healthy mindset. If that's what you're working on, having that clarity of this is what I want, no matter what. So when that time comes to go be with friends, you have the clarity and your compass is heading in that true north direction that you're going to focus on that and nothing else. So when someone says, hey, would you want to participate in some activity? You may say, no, I'm okay. And also not be concerned with the judgment that comes from that because you're focused on your direction and where you're going. You're focused on that end result. So clarity reduces the intensity of what this might feel like. Number 2 is separate fact from the story that someone has told you, or possibly the one you've been telling yourself. For instance, a fact. I'm doing something new. The story you might be telling yourself is that you're going to embarrass yourself. Many high performers, and I discovered this myself, is that question comes from the narrative. You're going to embarrass yourself, not anyone else. So if you change that phrase and that narrative to your success, where you're going in life, what you're doing, what the ultimate goal and outcome is going to be, how that not only is going to make you feel, but the peripheral things that it's going to offer, such as maybe a little better income, maybe that free time that you're looking for by having your own business, maybe it's leveling up at a job that you're at, and being even a further up the ladder leader. If that's the case, focus on that. You're not going to embarrass yourself. And no one else in the room has ever been free from embarrassment either. So try something new. And remember, from that experience comes learning. And that learning is what we build on. And that becomes our new narrative. And when you're operating from that narrative, well, that's a game changer. Now you're doing something completely different. In fact, you will be so eager to do something new, this so called word embarrassment won't even be a blink in your eye. It'll be almost nothing. In fact, you might even shrug it off if somebody says, "Hey, might you embarrass yourself?" And you'll say, "What's that?" Because you'll be that confident. Which takes us into part 3 is reframing the meaning. When you think of doing something new, whether it's starting a business or getting physically healthy, you might think to yourself, this is dangerous. What am I doing? But instead, you're focusing on, as I mentioned, the growth. See, reframing is one of the most powerful tools for changing your emotional response, as well as your behavior. You know, it's really interesting how you feel about something, and when you start correcting that feeling and adjusting that feeling, it's almost like turning, well, probably dating myself again, a dial on a radio. Now we just don't have radio. But it used to be where you'd have to turn a dial and move a needle, which picked up the frequencies on a box, and you would kind of dial that in. Well, it's the same thing. Once you start honing in on how things make you feel and changing a little bit of what you think about things, well, once that becomes hardwired, your responses and your behavior completely change. And it's not, I mean, not to say that it's a permanent fix, because it's going to slip in once in a while. But I guarantee that when those emotional muscles are trained and strong, and those feelings start to arise or show up, they're going to get squashed like a bug on a windshield. They're just going to disappear. I mean, they're just not going to be there for you. You'll be surprised once you develop this strength how your life changes, how it adjusts. You know, if you've ever seen a leader and admired them in any way, where they're just very focused, very intense, it's because they've honed in on that emotional muscle. And it's not stressful, it's just focus. Number 4, take controlled action. Action reduces fear faster than thinking. Start small. Maybe with your business, and you have an idea. Don't keep that idea under a rock. Maybe start with a message, maybe a social post, maybe a conversation with someone in your network. Action metabolizes fear. I found in many of my businesses, the more I talked about it, the more, well, positive feedback I got. And yeah, there was probably a few people that were hoping I wouldn't succeed, but I think most of them wanted me to succeed and gave me that positive energy. And it's that action. I can also share with you, since we're on this subject, is when you're having those conversations, you're posting that message, hey, this is what I'm going to do, guess what? You're more active to do it. I remember in starting my business when I would tell people, hey, I think I'm going to do this. This is something I'm going to really get fully into. And they would maybe mention, hey, have you let others know? Have you sent out a letter or a mailer or, now posted on social media? Well, again, that action and that action to share turned into an action for me to share that turned into me telling the world what I was going to do and getting even more feedback. So once you start doing this action, this controlled action, you'll find yourself starting to do things without even thinking about it, just because, again, it's going back and focusing on the energy of what you truly want. It's looking back at your compass and saying, yes, this is the end result. I want to get here. I want to head in this direction. And so you have more and more conversations with people, and maybe to the point where they come to you and say, hey, I understand you're doing something. And you say, why, yes, with all of the energy of that, there's no room for fear. There's no room for fear. And then they're sharing with you some options that you could consider. Hey, have you thought about talking to this person or networking with that person? I think you'd be a great pair if you had a conversation with this person. Before you know it, your business is growing because you've had those conversations. And truth be told, you may not even have the foundation, the structure, the brick and mortar. You may not even have any of that at this point, but you're energized, networking, and telling people about something you're doing. Now, let me just put a little icing on that cake is don't just run around telling people what you're going to do and then not do it, but sharing with people that you're going to do an action and then turn around and do that action. That's where the true growth takes away your fear. Number 5, reinforce with proof and praise. Each time that you do something like the activities mentioned, maybe a social post, maybe you get 1 or 2 likes. These are small wins. These small wins build confidence. When you tell the world what you're doing and you get all of this feedback, well, that ought to just tell you, what are you waiting for? There's your customer right there. There's your support team right there. Research shows praise strengthens learning and the repeat behavior. So as you, for instance, put up that social post about, hey, I'm getting ready to start this business, or I'm getting ready to take on the biggest endeavor of my life, so on. You share this with people, they're going to celebrate with you as well as yourself. And then you see that positive feedback. Don't just pat yourself on the back, but use that. Use that as fuel that's going to propel you forward, to encourage you to sign that lease or to do something you normally wouldn't do, like maybe talk to a stranger or to set up those meetings or to maybe make some phone calls. See, each one of these efforts creates progress, and each one of these points of progress are building courage. You need to celebrate this. Remember, hand up, cross your chest, pat yourself on the back. You're doing a great job. And don't listen to that other side that's sitting there saying, but you don't have this and you don't have that. Of course you don't. You're getting started. But as long as you keep propelling forward with the support and networking, and someone says, hey, how's your business going? You're great. I'm looking for a location. I want something strategic that is on a busy corner, or I want a good storefront, or I want a popular street, or whatever. You're sharing this information. And each time you do this and you get that feedback from someone else that you're sharing with, and maybe they have some insights or some networking connections, that all of a sudden you're on that street you want to be. You're on that street corner and the doors start opening up. I can share with you when that begins to happen, there is no fear. In fact, that's the least of your thoughts. You're too busy being creative at this stage, and embrace that creativity, and not look at it as overwhelmed, and not think too hard about some of these decisions, because these conditions, the effort, the progress, this courage that you're building up, it conditions the brain to associate this action with reward. Part three, fear is fuel. When directed properly, as mentioned, this fear can create focus, urgency, energy, and growth. When directed properly, you'll find that you're making decisions with a better speed and follow through. Remember, and be cautious. I don't want you to always be talking about this business you're building for the next 10 years. Many of these conversations and what you're saying, as well as what you're writing, probably should add that too. But I know if you're a frequent listener, you already know what we write, we invite. So you most likely have already written this down based on a previous discussion that we've had. So you've already written down your business idea, and you know that what we write, we invite. So let this be your follow through, that what you've written has now started to come into your life, and you're having conversations with people who are helping and assisting you, or at least giving you the confidence to say, hey, you're in the right direction. Hey, I can't wait till the store opens. I'll be your first customer. When you're getting that, that should energize you and give you the follow through, which also gives you that decision speed where you're starting to just make decisions, and you may find yourself slightly overwhelmed. I'll give you some caution there. I'll give you a break on that one, because things are going to be happening at lightning speed, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm working on the third store now. This is crazy. Or I'm building this business, and I, I don't have anything, but I have the platform. You may start to get that, but you're going to then have follow through and the creativity of how do you get beyond the platform? How do you get further into that? And again, networking with individuals that are in your field. How did they do it? And what did they do? And this creates what we've talked about too, is the clarity sprint. Where now you're running because you're focused and intense. And as we mentioned, I think it was a couple weeks ago, was the revenue rhythms. This is where you're at. This is what you're building. But fear becomes fuel when it's attached to action. So you've got to be doing something. You've probably also heard me and other people say, and I love the phrase, is people will eventually reward you in public for things that you've been doing in private. So do something, well, in your own space for this moment. Get yourself started. Start to build up that cadence. That will also squash some fear, because you're going to be more focused on your schedule and what you're doing. Maybe it's some social posts. Maybe it's a video like this. Maybe it's just selling your merchandise at the fairs or the festivals and stuff like that, where you rent space at a booth. Maybe that's where you start. And then you find so much success that all of a sudden you create that storefront where you have a brick and mortar building. But start somewhere. You know, that action is a great learning tool, and it'll subside fear like nobody's business and give you the confidence to know that, well, it can be done. You know, I went to a farmer's market the other weekend, and I was just amazed at the different businesses. Like, there was the fruits and vegetables and organic stuff, but It was people, somebody was making fresh pastries and someone was making something from their culture. It wasn't just like fruits and vegetables and stuff that you'd think, you know, a farmer's market would have. There was even a doctor there that was doing like a health screening exams. There was a what was it? It was a pottery thing made out of clay and glaze, but it was a more healthy option for grading some of our natural herbs and stuff. And it was like just it was almost like a time. I was like, who? Somebody saw this and said, you know what? I think others would like this. They began making these things. You can't buy them anywhere. I mean, you can, but it's not this great quality of something that's going to last forever. This is truly a one of a kind piece of art, as well as a utilizable tool that made out of clay and glaze. I mean, that's stuff from thousands of years ago that we were making our utensils with. So yeah, it's going to last forever as well. But somebody came up with that idea and now they're selling it and they're starting at a table. And who knows, they may end up in a brick and mortar shop with these different types of utensils and stuff that they're recreating from the ancient times, where, quite frankly, we had different diseases. So I share with you this. It starts with just action. Now, there's probably some common mistakes I should share with you before you get too excited to know that, yeah, there may be some pitfalls ahead. So let me begin. First of all, waiting to feel ready. Waiting to feel ready. I can tell you what, if you're waiting, you're never going to feel ready because from a sitting position, you're always going to have some excuse, some reason for not doing something. I marveled at, I believe it was was it Microsoft or Google? I believe it was Google that I remember reading the CEO would go out and have board meetings out on a walking track. And I thought, how innovative to get off your ass and, you know, not only exercising and taking a stroll, but having a conversation. That is action. Now, if you're walking and having a conversation with someone, do you truly think that your body has time to have fear when maybe posing a sensitive question? I don't think so. So as you're walking and being comfortable with someone and doing something else, that action subsides that fear. And you're probably going to say something like, hey, what if we did this? And you never know. That could be the innovative idea that changes the direction for a company, which can catapult your career. Maybe it's just walking with your business partner and negotiating something. Take a walk in the park, around the city block, anywhere, but just walking around. That is going to get away from that feeling ready to do something. If you have a challenging decision you need to make, get out and walk. And while you're walking, have those conversations, volley it back and forth, and then start to realize that some of your concerns are actually much smaller than you think. And the step forward in your business is exactly that, just one step away. So many times we avoid discomfort. I've always said you want to get comfortable with being with being uncomfortable. Once in a while, jump in and take a cold shower to feel uncomfortable. That's the point. So when you have something uncomfortable, you're able to pivot into not being completely uncomfortable, that you're okay. You can take that emotional moment and breathe it just like a cold shower and have a little bit of control and react. And not only does it have amazing health aspects to it, such as rejuvenate, shuffle, and adjust your cells. I mean, I could go on, but understand discomfort. Be in a room still and quiet. Maybe even meditate. But if it's not your thing, at least just be still and be there with your thoughts for a minute. Be uncomfortable. Great exercise. Also, overthinking. We talked about that earlier. Don't overthink and don't even think about the past. Focus on the future and what you want to do and go in that direction. Remember, the windshield is bigger than the rearview mirror. So don't overthink things and don't keep looking behind you at what you've done. Look at what you're doing because what you've done in comparison to what you want to do, well, those were just the small steps to get there. And if you're highly focused on what you did, I mean, certainly go back, keep some notes and whatnot to jot down. So if somebody says, "Hey, how did you do it?" or you want to repeat that building of a business again and again to scale, well, you probably want some of those notes. But living that experience, I'm sure you'll never forget. But don't overthink, as well as don't compare yourself to others. If you want to start, here's a great example, but you want to start a little coffee shop, a little barista, it's your idea. Set it up. Don't try to be like Starbucks. They're big and they're obnoxious. I'll say it here and I'll say it all day long. It's a malt shop. It's not even a barista cafe. They make milkshakes. When they put sugar and junk and whipped cream and cocoa and all that stuff into a cup, that's not the coffee experience. At least not the one that I enjoy. I enjoy a great small cup and espresso in a beautiful setting with a view, with a patio. Maybe it's on the waterfront, beachfront. Maybe it's in the city next to a park where you can see the trees and hear the birds. And that is an experience. Having this big green sign on every damn corner with a drive-through is not a barista coffee shop. It's so far from it. Now I know they built an empire and so be it. I'm not knocking what they built. They built something obnoxious, but don't compare yourself to them. You build yours. Maybe it's a tea shop, maybe it's a coffee shop, maybe it's a bookshop. Your idea is yours for a reason because the world needs it. So build it and create it. And don't compare yourself to what someone else is doing. And if there's one down the street or on the other side of town, so be it. It's their idea and it's their business. I laughed when I went to my stylist where I get my hair cut. I said, I didn't ever notice until the other day. I literally drive past 5 hair salons before I get here. I've never noticed them before, but because I was focused on that particular one, I read a few reviews. It's got a young owner, an entrepreneur, building a business, being selective with who his stylists are, who has the chairs in his facility. And it's not a big place. But I can tell you what, is I get transformed when I go there because it's relaxing. It's got great vibes, good energy vibes. Every time I go there, I feel energized and I get refreshed with a great hairstyle. I know my opinion, but nonetheless, I go there because I'm focused. I'm not worried about anyone else. And apparently the others are doing well too because they're still open. I've never checked in on them and I'm not really interested. I may stumble into one if all of a sudden my shop's not available, but I highly doubt that because I know the owner is focused and fully in action. Another thing, this is the last, but man, can beat you up sometimes. And it's not recognizing the progress. So find yourself writing things down once in a while. Not only is what we write, we invite, and you can continue to write down your dreams and aspirations as to what this business is supposed to look like, but maybe even keep a ledger of what you've done and the actions. That way you can track the progress and see that, well, You're doing things. And so when you begin to feel like, well, I'm just not doing enough, you look down at 20 items that you've done just in the last week, I think you're doing great. Now, these actions aren't necessarily producing results, and maybe it's kind of a learning curve for you. Unless you really studied the business, unless you've really networked with people who have already succeeded at this business that you're endeavoring in, well, there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for certain. But I can share with you that Thomas Edison once was asked, man, it took you 10,000 times. And he goes, no, I just found out 10,000 ways a light bulb didn't work. So it's learning experiences. You may be doing something no one else has done. We could take in our current life right now, in this current bubble, you take a guy like Elon Musk. He's doing things that people haven't done before, or at least doing them to scale. I know back in the day, even in the early 1900s, there was a gentleman named Nikolai Tesla, and he knew amazing things about electricity, how to manipulate it and whatnot. And quite frankly, he created the electric motor, which I believe created some form of an electric car, even in those days. But nonetheless, Mr. Musk has figured out how to do something at scale. I mean, we used to throw away rockets. In fact, there's some sitting out in the ocean that they would just fall. That was it. And he's figured out a way to make these things recyclable, how they land by themselves. I mean, I don't know what he's going to come up with next, but he's doing stuff that's pretty fearful. But he also understands that it's from those experiences. I remember watching a documentary about him, not to get off track, but he was excited about the launch. And somebody said, well, are you afraid of it crashing? And he's like, well, no, then I can learn something about it. So he didn't dismiss the fact that that was failure. He said, well, it's okay if it does. We just figured out how to make it better. That gives us an opportunity to see that there's a flaw. So be open to continuously practicing action, because you're going to learn and you're going to grow. So let's upgrade. You may think, hey, what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm not smart enough to do this? Well, we could stay with the same example of Mr. Musk and maybe even Mr. Tesla, that, and even Mr. Edison, that it wasn't necessarily him, but the team of people that he had with him. I'm sure if you ask a lot of things about engineering, Mr. Musk doesn't understand, but he knows he likes rockets, and he has plenty of people around him that know more about rockets than he does. He says what he would like it to do. They figure out how to make it happen. So it's not a matter of you being good enough. It's a matter of you having the action to not only start to put your dreams down on paper, what we write, we invite, but also the action of connecting and networking with those who are doing something similar or have ideas. Maybe you want to start talking, if we go back to the coffee shop, start start talking to coffee suppliers and people that have, start testing coffee. Find out what coffees you like, because you're only going to serve the best coffee at your counter. And you may taste some really awful coffee that if you were just to say, oh, well, we're going to take that coffee because it's cheap and sell it over your counter, you're not going to have a lot of customers, because they're going to start giving you some information about how they don't like your coffee. So it's not a matter of you being good enough. It's a matter of you, again, action, subsiding the fear to do this thing that you desire to do, which I might add, a little more icing on this cake, is that it's probably your soul's purpose why you're driven to do something like this. Maybe even one of your soul's purposes. We can have many. Or it's just something you want to do for fun. I don't know. Again, this is yours. but don't think of not being good enough. So here's an upgrade: identify fear, reframe the meaning of that fear, take some action, review and improve, and repeat. You will find that from all of those steps above, confidence builds through this repetition. Fear doesn't mean stop, it means you're at the edge of something bigger. So step forward and let it fuel you. This has been another amazing episode of Ask Adam Live. I hope that you have enjoyed all of the information I've shared. Look for the accompanying worksheet, and I look forward to seeing you on yet another episode of Ask Adam Live. Now let us all go out and make it a great day.